Yellow? Yellow? Let me check. Okay, audio seems to be running. Hi. Hello. Uh, anyone here? Chat, you there? Uh, Is audio working? Well, I'll assume it is for now. You might notice I'm wearing a different outfit, and that's because I had to use the low-quality version of my model that doesn't have a shirt or hair bones. See? My hair's one strange piece. Woo. Yes, woo. So this stream is back to being, Lovecraft. It's another Lovecraft stream. I guess I should summarize the last one. So, we're reading, a book called At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, who is a super uber mega racist, from the 1900s. This book was written in 1931, released in 36. Its brain isn't working. It's one of his less racist books, mainly because it's about an isolated expedition, and all of the characters are white. So he doesn't really have a chance to be racist in this one. I guess I'll, summarize, the last few chapters. We're on the, we read the first 4 chapters last time, and now we're on the 5th chapter, and I'll summarize for those of you who weren't here on the last stream, or those of you who need a refresher. Basically, we're following a warning. This book in-universe is a warning to the public by this dude. We don't know his name. He's about 50-something, and he is a geologist who was sent on a expedition to the Antarctic. And here. They went to about this area of the Antarctic at about McMurdo, and the Queen Maud Mountains. Oh, hello. Hi, Wiz. You're here. Cool. Anyway, so we're following, this dude, 50-something-year-old, geologist, from the Miskatonic University, who was sent on a expedition to do some geological surveys in the Queen Maud Mountains, by McMurdo Sound. So, the expedition was going fine at first until they found a strange rock with a triangular pattern on it, and one of the expeditioners, Lakefield, oh, hello, Satan. Hello. Hello. Welcome. We're reading again. I'll continue. So, with the summary of the last stream. One of the, people on the expedition, Lakefield, thought that this, strange rock warranted more investigation, so he took, a few of the planes and most of the other people west to where he thought there would be more of these rocks. But main character, geologist here, stayed at the base near, the Queen Alexandria range. The Queen Alexandra range. Alexandra? Odd. Is my internet okay? Getting a buffering problem. Yeah, it's being worse today. How bad is it? Do I need to, go to JPEG mode? I've already gone to the low quality model. Do we need to go to JPEG mode to help watchability of the stream? No response? Okay, activity feed says someone followed me this minute. Thanks, person who did that. Though it does seem that you're not watching the stream. So that's cool. Anyway. So part of the expedition went west into Antarctica, where they thought there would be more of this special rock. And the other part, just a few people, stayed at the Queen Alexandria range. The portion that went west... Oh, it was you? Hello! Hello. Okay, then that's weird. It says there's only one viewer, but there's 2 people in chat talking. What a strange system. Hello, thanks, Consent Van. Okay, it's good that there's... Cool name. Back to summary mode. Yeah, again, basically, the people who went out west found a massive, absolute, chunking mountain range, bigger than the Himalayas, that had strange geometric shapes and patterns on it, and they landed, in the foothills before it, and started to do some geological excavation. Yours says 3 viewers? Okay, then my thing's just weird. I'll ignore that for now. Strange. Yeah. And then the part of the expedition that was by the mountains dug into a cave and found some strange, alien barrel creatures. Because of course this is a Lovecraft book. So there has to be alien creatures. Supposed corpses of these creatures, though, I'm betting that some of them are alive. They're barrel-like, very thick, tough skin, can't be cut through even with, like, a blowtorch. They have a bunch of... Oh, hello, V-Red Pill. Brains. These are not zombies. Anyway, the barrel creatures had a bunch of tentacles sticking out of them. And thanks, V-Red Pill, for following. Thanks. Cool. Great. Where was I? Was at the strange barrel alien creatures. They had tentacles and starfish faces, and were all around strange. But then, main character suddenly lost contact with the expedition out at these miraculous mountains. And so, about 7 hours Sorry, that's your zombie? He wants brains? You have a pet zombie? That's cool. I'm sorry, I don't have any brains, so... might want to look elsewhere. Yeah. And main character flew out to the supposed spot of, Lakefield's encampment, and then uh, they found everything wrecked and destroyed. Apparently, the sled dogs that Lakefield had brought out broke out and attacked everyone, and it was and there was a bunch of chunks of flesh taken out of both the humans and the dogs, and 6 of the strange alien barrel creatures were buried, strangely. Um, and now we're on main character and Dansforth, another person on the expedition, are heading up over the mountains, and they just got over the mountains to see what's on the other side. And yeah, that's where we left off. I'm gonna take a drink of water, and then I guess I'll start reading. Okay. Let me... Here's the book. Oh, now my viewer count says 3 viewers. Okay, strange. Chapter 5. I think that both of us simultaneously cried out in mixed awe, wonder, terror, and disbelief in our own senses as we finally cleared the pass, and saw what lay beyond. Of course, we might have had some natural theory in the back of our heads to steady our faculties for the moment. Probably we thought of such things as the grotesquely weathered stones of the Garden of the Gods in Colorado, or the fantastically symmetrical wind-carved rocks of the Arizona desert. Perhaps even we half thought that the sight a mirage, like we had seen in the morning before on first approaching those mountains of madness. Oh, also, you might notice, the title of the book is dropped in the text a lot, at least twice a chapter. We must have had some normal notions to fall back upon, as our eyes swept that limitless, tempest-scarred plateau and grasped the almost endless labyrinth of colossal, regular, and geometrically eurythmic stone masses, which reared their crumbled and pitted crests above a glacial sheet not more than 40 or 50 feet deep at its thickest, and in places obviously thinner. The effect of the monstrous sight was indescribable, for some fiendish violation of no natural law seemed certain at the onset. Here, on a hellishly ancient tableland fully 20,000 feet high, and in a climate deadly to habitation since a pre-human age not less than 500,000 years ago, there stretched nearly to the vision's limits a tangle of orderly stone, which only the desperation of mental self-defense could possibly attribute to any but conscious and artificial cause. We had previously dismissed, so far as serious thought was concerned, any theory that the cubes and ramparts of the mountainsides were other than natural in origin. How could they be otherwise, when man himself could scarcely have been differentiated from the great apes at the time, when this region succumbed to the present unbroken reign of glacial death? Yet now the sway of reason seemed irrefutably shaken, for this cyclopean maze of squared, curved, and angled blocks had features which cut off all comfort refuge. It was very clearly the blasphemous city of the mirage in stark, objective, and ineluctable reality. That damnable portent had a material basis after all. there had been some horizontal stratum of ice dust in the upper air, and this shocking stone survival had projected its image across the mountains according to the simple laws of reflection. Of course, the phantom had been twisted and exaggerated and had contained things which the real source did not contain. Yet now, as we saw the real source, we thought it even more hideous and menacing than its distant image. Frightful things from utter annihilation in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years it had brooded there amidst the blasts of a bleak upland. Quote, Corona Mundi, roof of the world, unquote. All sorts of fantastic phrases sprang to our lips as we looked dizzily down at the unbelievable spectacle. I thought again of the eldritch, primal myths that had so persistently haunted me since my first sight of this dead Antarctic world. Of the demonic plateau of Lang, of the Maigo, or abominable snowmen of the Himalayas, of the Pneumatic manuscript with their pre-human implications, of the Cthulhu cult, of the Necronomicon, and of the Hyperborean legends of formless Sathuga, and the worse than formless star spawn associated with that solemnity. For boundless miles in every direction, the thing stretched off, with very little thinning. Indeed, as our eyes followed it to the right and left along the base of the low, gradual foothills which separated it from the actual mountain rim, we decided that we could see no thinning at all except for an interruption at the pass through which we had come. We had merely struck at random a limited part of incalculable extent. The foothills were more sparsely sprinkled with grotesque stone structures, linking the terrible city to the already familiar cubes and ramparts which evidently formed its mountain outposts. These latter, as well as the queer cave mouths, were as thick on the inner as on the outer sides of the mountains. The nameless stone labyrinth consisted, for the most part, of walls from 10 to 150 feet in ice, clear height, and of a thickness varying from 5 to 10 feet. It was composed mostly of prodigious blocks of primordial slate, schist, and sandstone. Blocks in many cases as large as 4 by 6 by 8 feet, though in several places it seemed to be carved out of a solid, uneven bedrock of Precambrian slate. The buildings were far from equal in size, there being innumerable honeycomb arrangements of enormous extent, as well as smaller, separate structures. The general shape of these things tended to be conical, pyramidal, or terraced, though there were many perfect cylinders, perfect cubes, clusters of cubes, and other rectangular forms, and a peculiar sprinkling of angled edifices whose five-pointed ground plan suggested modern fortifications. The builders had made constant and expert use of the principles of the arch and domes that had probably existed in the city's heyday. More water. The whole tangle was monstrously weathered, and the glacial surface from which the towers projected was strewn with fallen blocks and immemorial debris. Where the glaciation was transparent, we could see the lower part of the gigantic piles, and we noticed the ice-preserved stone bridges which connected the different towers at varying distances above the ground. On the exposed walls, we could detect the scarred places where other and higher bridges of the same sort had existed. closer inspection revealed countless largest windows, some of which were closed with shutters of a petrified material, originally wood, though most gaped open in a sinister and menacing fashion. Many of the ruins, of course, were roofless, and with uneven though wind-rounded upper edges, whilst others, of a more sharply conical or pyramidal model, or else protected by higher surrounding structures, preserved intact outlines despite the omnipresent crumbling and pitting with the field glass. With the field glass, we could barely make out what seemed to be sculptural decorations in horizontal bands. Decoration including those curious groups of dots whose presence on the ancient soapstones now assumed a vastly larger significance. In many places, the buildings were totally ruined, and the ice sheet driven deeply from various geologic causes. In other places, the stonework was worn down to the very level of glaciation. One broad swath, extending from the plateau's interior to a cleft in the foothills, about a mile to the left of the pass we had traversed, was wholly free from buildings. It probably represented, we concluded, the course of some great river which in Tertiary times, millions of years ago, had poured through the city and into some prodigious subterranean abyss of the Great Barrier Range. Certainly, this was above all a region of caves, gulfs, and underground secrets beyond human penetration. Looking back to our sensations, and recalling our dazedness at viewing this monstrous survival from eons which we had thought pre-human, I can only wonder that we persevered the semblance of equilibrium. That we preserved the semblance of equilibrium, which we did, of course. We knew something. Chronology, scientific theory, or our own consciousness was woefully awry, yet we kept enough poise to guide the plane, observe many things quite minutely, and take a careful series of photographs, which may yet serve both us and the world in good stead. In my case, ingrained scientific habit may have helped, for above all my bewilderment and sense of menace, there burned a dominant curiosity to fathom more of this age-old secret, to know what sort of beings had built and lived in this incalculably gigantic place, and what relation to the general world of its time, or of other times, so unique a concentration of life could have had. More water. For this place could be no ordinary city. It must have formed the primary nucleus and center of some archaic and unbelievable chapter of Earth's history, whose outward ramifications, recalled only dimly in the most obscure and distorted myths, had vanished utterly amidst the chaos of terrene convulsions long before any human race we know had shambled out of Apodum. Here sprawled a Paleogean megalopolis, compared with which the fabled Atlantis and Lemuria, Comorium and Uzudaroum, and Olathok in the land of Lomar are recent things of today, not even of yesterday. A megalopolis ranking with such widespread pre-human blasphemies as Valusia, Rayla, Ib in the land of Minar, and the nameless city of Arabia Deserta. As we flew above that triangle of stark Titan towers, my imagination sometimes escaped all bounds and roved aimlessly in realms of fantastic associations, even weaving links betwixt this lost world and some of my own wildest dreams concerning the mad horror at the camp. The plane's fuel tank, in the interest of greater lightness, had only been partly filled, hence we now had to exert caution in our explorations. Even so, we covered an enormous extent of ground, or rather air, after swooping down to a level where the wind became virtually negligible. There seemed to be no limit to the mountain range, or to the length of frightful stone city which bordered its inner foothills. 50 miles of flight in each direction showed no major change in the labyrinth of rock and masonry that clawed up, corpse-like through the eternal ice. There were, though, some highly absorbing diversifications, such as the carvings on the canyon where that broad river had once pierced the foothills and approached its sinking place in the Great Range. The headlands at the stream's endless entrance had been boldly carved into cyclopean pylons, and something about the ridgy, barrel-shaped design stirred up oddly vague, hateful, and confusing semi-remembrances in both Danforth and me. We also came upon several star-shaped open spaces, evidently public squares, and noted various undulations in the terrain, where a sharp hill rose. It was generally hollowed out into some sort of rambling stone edifice, but there were at least 2 exceptions. Of the latter, one was too badly weathered to disclose what had been on the jutting eminence, while the other still bore a fantastic conical monument carved out of the solid rock roughly resembling such things as the well-known snake tomb in the ancient valley of Petra. You bring it up to support your friends. In a pinch, I get every device in the house watching. Okay. Flying inland from the mountains, we discovered the city was not of infinite width, even though its length along the foothills seemed endless. After about 30 miles, the grotesque stone buildings began to thin out, and in 10 more miles we came to an unbroken waste, virtually without signs of sentient artifice. The course of the river beyond the city, marked by a broad, depressed line, while the land had assumed a somewhat greater ruggedness, seeming to slope slightly upward as it receded in the mid-hazed west. So far we had made no landing, yet to leave the plateau without an attempt of entering some of the monstrous structures would have been inconceivable. Accordingly, we decided to find a smooth place on the foothills near our navigable pass, there grounding the plane and preparing to do some exploration on foot. Though these gradual slopes were partly covered with a scattering of ruins, low flying soon disclosed an ampler number of possible landing spaces. Selecting that nearest to the pass, since our flight would be across the Great Range and back to the camp, we succeeded at about 12:30 p.m. in effecting a landing on a smooth, hard snowfield, wholly devoid of obstacles and well adapted to a swift and favorable takeoff later on. It did not seem necessary to protect the plane with a snowbanking for so brief a time and in so comfortable an absence of high winds at this level. Hence, we merely saw that the landing skis were safely lodged, and that the vital parts of the mechanism were guarded against the cold. For our foot journey, we discarded the heaviest of our flying furs, and took with us a small outfit consisting of pocket compass, hand camera, light provisions, voluminous notebooks and paper, geologist's hammer and chisel, specimen bags, coil of climbing rope, and powerful electric torches with extra batteries. This equipment having been carried in the plane on the chance that we might be able to effect a landing, take ground pictures, make drawings and topographical sketches, and obtain rock specimens from some bare slope, outcropping, or mountain cave. Went to the streamer Neko Suris. They were a performance VTuber. Okay, chat. I've lost. Fortunately, we had a supply of extra paper to tear up, place in a spare specimen bag, and use on the ancient principle of hare and hounds for marking our course in any interior mazes we might be able to penetrate. This had been brought in case we found some cave system with air quiet enough to allow such a rapid and easy method in place of the usual rock clipping method of trailblazing. Walking cautiously downhill over the crusted snow towards the stupendous stone labyrinth that loomed against the opalescent west, we felt almost as keen a sense of imminent marvels as we had felt on approaching the unfathomed mountain pass 4 hours previously. True, we had become visually familiar with the incredible secret concealed by the barrier peaks, yet the prospect of actually entering primordial walls reared by conscious beings, perhaps of millions of years ago, before any known race of men could have existed, was nonetheless awesome and potentially terrible in its implications of cosmic abnormality. Ended fighting their audience for a good few minutes, horrible time. Got called Anarchitty? Oh, that's a bit of a yikes. Reformism bad. Okay. It's good that you seem to have left that. I'll take this chance to drink yet more water. Okay. Where was I? Through the thinness of the air at this prodigious altitude made exertion somewhat more difficult than usual, both Danforth and I found ourselves bearing up very well, and felt quite equal to almost any task which might fall to our lot. It only took a few steps to bring us to a shapeless ruin worn level with the snow, while 10 or 15 rods further on there was a huge, roofless rampart, still complete in its gigantic, five-pointed outline, and rising to an irregular height of 10 or 11 feet. For this latter we headed, and when at last we were actually able to touch its weathered cyclopean blocks, we felt we had established an unprecedented and almost blasphemous link with forgotten aeons normally closed to our species. This rampart, shaped like a star and perhaps 300 feet from point to point, was built of Jurassic sandstone and blocks of irregular size, averaging 6 by 8 feet in surface. There was a row of arched loopholes or windows about 4 feet wide and 5 feet high, spaced quite symmetrically along the points of the star and at its inner angles, and with the bottoms about 4 feet from the glaciated surface. Looking through these, we could see that the masonry was fully 5 feet thick, that there were no partitions remaining within, and that there were traces of banded carvings or bas-reliefs on the interior walls. Facts we had indeed guessed before. When flying low over this rampart and others like it, though lower parts must have originally existed, all traces of such things were now wholly obscured by the deep layer of ice and snow at this point. Crawled through one of the windows and vainly tried to decipher the nearly effaced mural designs, but did not attempt to disturb the glaciated floor. Our orientation flights had indicated that many buildings in the city proper were less ice-choked, and that we might perhaps find wholly clear interiors leading down to the true ground level if we entered those structures still roofed at the top. Before we left the rampart, we photographed it carefully and studied its mortarless cyclopean masonry with complete bewilderment. We wished that Padbody were present, for his engineering knowledge might have helped us guess how such titanic blocks could have been handled in that unbelievably remote age when the city and its outskirts were built up. The half-mile walk downhill to the actual city, with the upper wind shrieking vainly and savagely through the skyward peaks in the background, was something of which the smallest details will always remain engraved on my mind. Only in fantastic nightmares could any human beings but Danforth and me conceive such optical effects. Between us and the churning vapors of the west lay that monstrous tangle of dark stone towers, its outer and incredible forms impressing us afresh at every new angle of vision. It was a mirage in solid stone, and were it not for the photographs, I would still doubt such a thing could be. The general type of masonry was identical with that of the rampart we examined, but the extravagant shaped apes which this masonry took in its urban manifestations were past all description. Even the pictures illustrate only one or two phases of its endless variety: preternatural massiveness and utterly alien exoticism. There were geometrical forms for which an elucid would scarcely find a name, cones of all degrees of regularity and truncation, terraces of every sort of provocative disproportion, shafts with odd bulbous enlargements, broken columns and curious groups, and five-pointed or five-ridged arrangement of mad grotesqueness. As we drew nearer, we could see beneath certain transparent parts of the ice sheet, and detect some of the tubular stone bridges that connected the crazily sprinkled structures at various heights. Of orderly streets there seemed to be none, the only broad open swath being a mile to the left, where the ancient river had doubtless flowed through the town into the mountains. Our field glasses showed the external, horizontal bands of nearly effaced sculptures in dot groups to be very prevalent, and we could half imagine what the city must have once looked like, even though most of the roofs and tower tops had necessarily perished. As a whole, it had been a complex tangle of twisted lanes and alleys, all of them deep canyons, and some little better than tunnels because of the overhanging masonry or overarching bridges. Now, outspread below us, it looks like a dream fantasy against a westward mist whose northern end the low, reddish, Antarctic sun of early afternoon was struggling to shine, and when for a moment that sun encountered a denser obstruction and plunged the scene into temporary shadow, the effect was subtly menacing in a way I can never hope to depict. Even the faint howling and piping of the unfelt wind in the great mountain passes behind us took on a wilder note of purposeful malignity. The last stage of our descent to the town was unusually steep and abrupt, and a rock outcropping at the edge where the grade change led us to think an artificial terrace had once existed there. Under the glaciation, we believed there must be a flight of steps or its equivalent. When at last we plunged into the town itself, clambering over fallen masonry and shrinking from the oppressive nearness and dwarfing height of the omnipresent crumbled and pitted walls, our sensations again became such that I marvel at the amount of self-control we retained. Danforth was frankly jumpy, and began making some offensively irrelevant speculations about the horror at the camp, which I resented more because I could not help sharing certain conclusions forced upon us by many features of this morbid survival from nightmare antiquity. The speculations worked on his imagination too, for in one place, where the priest's litter alley turned a sharp corner, he insisted that he saw faint traces of ground markings which he did not like, whilst elsewhere he stopped to listen to a subtle, imaginary sound from some undefined point. A muffled musical piping, he said, not unlike that of the wind in the mountain caves, yet somehow disturbingly different. The ceaseless five-pointedness of the surrounding architecture and of the few distinguishable mural arrests had a dimly sinister suggestiveness we could not escape, and gave us a touch of terrible subconscious certainty concerning the primal entities which had reared and dwelt in this unhallowed place. Nevertheless, our scientific and adventurous souls were not wholly dead, and we mechanically carried out our program of chipping specimens from all the different rock types represented in the masonry. We wished a rather full set in order to draw better conclusions regarding the age of the place. Nothing in the great outer walls seemed to date from the later than the Jurassic and Comician periods, nor was any piece of stone in the entire place of greater recency than the Phyliocene age. In stark certainty, we were wandering amidst a death which had reigned at least 500,000 years, and in all probability even longer. As we proceeded through this maze of stone-shadowed twilight, we stopped at all available apertures to study interiors and investigate entrance possibilities. Some were above our reach, whilst others led only into ice-hooked ruins as unroofed and barren as the rampart on the hill. One, though, spacious and inviting, opened on a seemingly bottomless abyss without visible means of descent. Now and then we had a chance to study the petrified wood of a surviving shutter, and were impressed by the fabulous antiquity implied in the still discernible grain. These things had come from Mesozoic gymnosperms and conifers, especially Cretaceous synads, and from fan palms and early angiosperms of the plainly tertiary date. Nothing definitely later than the Phyliocene could be discovered. In the placing of these shutters, whose edges showed the former presence of queer and long-vanished hinges, usage seemed to be varied, some being on the outer and some on the inner side of deep embrasures. They seemed to have become wedged in place, thus surviving the rusting of their former and probably metallic fixtures and fastenings. After a time, we came across a row of windows, in the bulges of a colossal five-edged cone of undamaged apex, which led into a vast, well-preserved room with stone flooring, but these were too high in the room to permit descent without a rope. We had a rope with us, but did not wish to bother with this 20-foot drop unless obliged to, especially in this plateau air where great demands were made upon the heart action. This enormous room was probably a hall or concourse of some sort, and our electric torch showed bold, distinct, and potentially startling sculptures arranged around the walls in broad horizontal bands, separated by equally broad strips of conventional arabesques. Arabesques, that's how you say that. We took careful note of this spot, planning to enter here unless a more easily gained interior were encountered. Finally, though, we did encounter exactly the thing we wished, an archway about 6 feet wide and 10 feet high, making the former end of an aerial bridge which had spanned an alley about 5 feet above the present level of glacification. These archways, of course, were flush with upper-story floors, and in this case, one of the floors still existed. The building thus accessible was a series of rectangular terraces on our left facing westward. That across the alley where the other archway yawned was a decrepit cylinder with no windows, and with a curious bulge about 10 feet above the aperture. It was totally dark inside, and the archway seemed to open on a well of illimitable emptiness. Heap debris made entrance to the vast left-hand building doubly easy, yet for a moment we hesitated before taking advantage of the long-wished chance. For though we had penetrated into this tangle of archaic mystery, it required fresh resolution to carry us actually inside a complete and surviving building of a fabulous elder world, whose nature was becoming more and more hideously plain to us. In the end, however, we made the plunge, and scrambled up over the rubble into the gaping embrasure. The floor beyond was of great slate slabs, and seemed to form the outlet of a long, high corridor with sculpted walls. Observing the many inner archways which led off of it, and realizing the probable complexity of the nest of apartments within, we decided we must begin our system of hare and hound trailblazing. Hitherto our compasses, together with frequent glimpses of the vast mountain range between the towers in our rear, had been enough to prevent us from losing our way. But now on, the artificial substitute would be necessary. Accordingly, we reduced our extra paper to shreds of suitable size, placed these in a bag to be carried by Daneforth, and prepared to use them as economically as safety would allow. This method would probably gain us immunity from straying, since there did not appear to be any strong air currents inside the primordial masonry. If such should develop, or if our paper should give out, we would of course fall back on the more secure, though more tedious, retarding method of rock chipping. Just how extensive a territory we had opened up it was impossible to guess without a trial. The close and frequent connection of the buildings made it likely that we might cross from one to another in bridges underneath the ice, except where impeded by local collapses and geological rifts. For very little glaciation seemed to have entered the massive constructions. Almost all of the areas of transparent ice had revealed the submerged windows as tightly shuttered, as if the town had been left in that uniform state until the glacial sheet came to stabilize the lower part for all succeeding time. Indeed, one gained a curious impression that this place had been deliberately closed and deserted in some dim, bygone eon, rather than overwhelmed by any sudden calamity or even gradual decay. Had the coming of the ice been foreseen, and a nameless population left en masse to seek a less doomed abode? The precise physiographic conditions attending the formation of the ice sheet at this point would have to wait for later solution. It had not, very plainly, been a grinding drive. Perhaps the pressure of accumulated snows had been responsible, and perhaps some flood from the river, or bursting of some ancient glacial dam in the Great Range had helped create the special state now observable. Imagination could conceive almost anything in connection with this place. Okay, we've done a chapter. At the end of every chapter, I'm gonna check in on chat. How are you guys doing? You good? I'll give you guys about a minute to say anything, and then I'll continue reading. Okay? Okay, about 5 seconds, and then I'll start reading again. Okay. Chapter 6. It would be cumbrous? It would become to give a detailed, consecutive account of our wanderings inside that cavernous and aeon-dead honeycomb of primal masonry. Oh, hi, Modoc77. Welcome. Do you want a synopsis of what we've gone up to this point, or do you think you know the story? I'm reading At the Mountain of Madness by... Yes, please. Okay. So, up to this point, we're following main character who doesn't have a name, a 50-something-year-old geologist from the Miskatonic University, who was sent on a geologic expedition to Antarctica, specifically this area of Antarctica, the Queen Maud Mountains, uh, where he and a bunch of other people were going to use a new fancy drill to drill into the ice. So when he got there, they did some geologic expeditions, and one of the men, named Lakefield, found a strange rock with a triangular pattern on it. And Lakefield became somewhat obsessed with this rock and finding more of them. And he concluded that more of this rock formation was west of the area they were currently investigating. Though the original plan was for everyone to head east. But due to his constant, I guess, negling? I don't have a word for it. Constant asking, they sent him most of the sled dogs which they had, 4 planes, and most of the men out west, and our main character stayed at base, communicating with the away party through wireless. And that was then communicated to the public through a ship that was kept at McMurdo Sound, here, right next to Mount Erebus. The away party found some absolutely massive, anomalous mountains that had strange geometric shapes like ramparts and cubes on the sides of them. These mountains were described as stretching farther than the eye could see and being taller than the Himalayas. The away group landed at the foothills of the mountains and gave frequent updates to main character and the home base, I guess, in the Queen Alexandria range. They eventually dug into a cave, which was filled with the corpses of long-dead animals like dinosaurs and stuff. They also found the corpses of a bunch of weird, thick-skinned, this apparently perfectly preserved, barrel-like creatures. Like a barrel, a thick, leathery barrel, with weird, fleshy wings coming out of it, about 7 feet deep, and tentacles at either end, and a starfish-like face. So they brought the specimens in for investigation, but all of their sled dogs, about 37 or so of them, out of the 50 total, 2 had died, and 10 were being kept with our main character. The sled dogs absolutely hated these strange corpses that they found. So they had to move the sled dogs away to a temporary enclosure. But then suddenly our main character, after sleeping and waking up the next day, lost contact with the away party at the very strange mountains. And 1 second, I need to drink some water. And so they took the last plane and their 10 dogs, my character and whoever else stayed with him, and went to the mountains, to go see what had happened to them. And they found, everyone dead. The camp was totally wrecked. The dogs had apparently broken out of their enclosure and started attacking people, though there is evidence of something else killing things and large chunks of meat taken out of both the people and the dogs there. Now, it might be the strange creatures they found perfectly preserved in that random bone cave. I don't know. It's totally a mystery. After that, they also found 6 strange burials, like burials that were made for 6 of the, 16 corpses of the strange barrel creatures. that they found. Yes, Satan's Ghost, this is a map. This is an actual map of Antarctica that I got for reference. Eventually, they decided to swear complete secrecy about these events to the public. And our main character and someone called, oh, what's his name again? Let me find his name. Danforth. Danforth then, and the main character then got on a plane to go see what was on the other side of the mountain. Though, even though everyone was dead, they still wanted to do a bit of investigating of these massive mountains that no one had discovered before. So they took the plane and flew over the top, flew through a valley in one of the mountains. And once they got to the other side, they saw a massive, strange city encased in ice, which according to geological investigation existed, millions of years ago. The city's, there's a great dried up riverbed, and just a lot of things, and that's about where we are in the book, but the book isn't completely chronological. The book is actually written as a warning to the public to not go to those mountains, because another expedition, after hearing the censored version of this expedition, is going to set out to the mountains, and main character doesn't want that expedition to go, so main character is declassifying all this information and releasing it. Anyway, that's about where we're at. They're investigating the city right now. We've just started chapter 6. Oh, another thing I'd like to mention before I start reading, in just a second. The architecture of the city is described as Arabesque, which is obviously just a very... It's obviously just, 1930s Orientalism, because what could be strange and alien? The Arabs. This is also a great time to remind everyone that H.P. Lovecraft, author of this book, is a super uber mega racist. With all that being said, I'll continue reading, I guess. I need to turn the book back on. Whoop. Let me get water. It would be cumbrous to give a detailed, consecutive account of our wanderings inside that cavernous, eon-dead honeycomb of primal masonry, that monstrous lair of elder secrets which now echoed for the first time. After uncounted epochs, to the tread of human feet. This is especially true because so much of the horrible drama and revelation came from a mere study of the omnipresent mural carvings. Our flashlight photographs of those carvings will do much towards proving the truth of what we are now disclosing, and it is lamentable that we had not a larger film supply with us. As it was, we made crude notebook sketches of certain salient features after all our films were used up. The building which we had entered was one of great size and elaborateness, and gave us an impressive notion of the architecture of the nameless geologic past. The inner partitions were less massive than the outer walls, but on the lower levels were excellently preserved. Labyrinthine complexity, involving curiously irregular differences in floor levels, characterized the entire arrangement, and we would certainly have been lost at the very outset, but for the trail of torn paper left behind us. We decided to explore the more decrepit upper parts first of all, hence climbed aloft in the maze for a distance of some 100 feet to where the topmost tier of chambers yawned and snowily ruinously open to the polar sky. Yawned snowily and ruinously open to the polar sky, sorry. Ascent was effected over the steep, transversely ribbed stone ramps, or included planes which with everywhere served in lieu of stairs. The rooms we encountered were of all imaginable shapes and proportions, ranging from 5-pointed stars to triangles and perfect cubes. It might be safe to say that their general average was about 30 by 30 feet in floor area and 20 feet in height, though many larger apartments existed. After thoroughly examining the upper regions and the glacial level, we descended, story by story, into the submerged part, where indeed we soon saw we were in a continuous maze of connected chambers and passages, probably leading over unlimited areas outside this particular building. The cyclopean massiveness and gigantism of everything about us became curiously oppressive, and there was something vaguely but deeply unhuman in all the contours, dimensions, proportions, decorations, and construction of the nuances of the blasphemously archaic stonework. We soon realized, from what the carvings related, that this monstrous city was many million years old. 1 second. I should explain what cyclopean means, just in case anyone doesn't know, because they use it quite a lot to describe things. Basically, back in ancient Greece, before ancient Greece, in ancient Greece, Mycenaean Greece, the people built their stone walls with just massive stones, instead of smaller brickwork that the later Greece would use. And so the later Greeks called it Cyclopean because they didn't think humans could do that. So they blamed it all on the Cyclopses. These were Cyclops walls. Anyway, that just means the stones in the walls were big. These are some chonker stones. We cannot yet explain the engineering principles used in the anomalous balancing and adjustments of the vast rock masses. Though the function of the arch was clearly much relied on, the rooms were visited and were wholly bare of all portable contents, a circumstance which sustained our belief in the city's deliberate desertion. The prime decorative feature was the almost universal system of mural sculpture, which tended to run in continuous horizontal bands 3 feet wide, arranged from floor to ceiling in alteration, with bands of equal width given over to geometric arabesques. There it is, arabesque again. There were exceptions to this rule of arrangement, but its preponderance was overwhelming. Often, however, a series of smooth cartouches containing oddly patterned groups of dots would be sunk along one of the arabesque bands. The technique we soon saw was mature, accomplished, and aesthetically evolved into the highest degree of civilized mastery. Though utterly alien in every detail to any known art tradition of the human race, in delicacy of execution, no sculpture I had ever seen could approach it. The minutest details of elaborate vegetation or of animal life were rendered with astonishing vividness, despite the bold scale of the carvings, whilst conventional designs were marvels of skillful intricacy. The arabesques displayed a profound use of mathematical principles, and were made up of obscurely symmetrical curves and angles based on the quantity of 5. The pictorial bands followed a highly formalized tradition and involved a peculiar treatment of perspective, but had an artistic force that moved us profoundly, notwithstanding the intervening gulf of vast geologic periods. Their method of design hinged on a singular juxtaposition of the cross-section with the two-dimensional silhouette, and embodied an analytical psychology beyond that of any known race of antiquity. It is useless to try to compare this art with any represented in our museums. Those who see our photographs will probably find its closest log in certain grotesque conceptions of the most daring futurists. Can I almost scroll down? It's not. Ah, there we are. Okay. The arabesque tracery consisted altogether of depressed lines whose depth on unweathered walls varied from 1 to 2 inches. When cartouches with dots groups appeared, evidently as inscriptions in some unknown and primordial language and alphabet, the depression of the smooth surface was perhaps 1.5 inches, and of the dots perhaps 1 inch more. The pictorial bands were in countersunk low relief, their background being depressed about 2 inches from the original wall surface. In some specimens, marks of a formal coloration could be detected, though for the most part untold aeons had disintegrated and banished any pigments which may have been applied. The more one studied the marvelous technique, the more one admired the things. Beneath their strict conventionalism, one could grasp the minute and accurate observation and graphic skill of the artists, and indeed the very conventions themselves served to symbolize and accentuate the real essence or vital differentiation of every object delineated. We felt, too, that besides these recognizable excellences, there were others lurking beyond the reach of our perceptions. Certain touches here and there gave vague hints of latent symbols and stimuli which another mental and emotional background and a fuller or different sensory equipment might have made of profound and poignant significance to us. The subject matter of the sculptures obviously came from the life of the vanished epoch of their creation, and contained a large proportion of evident history. It is this abnormal historic mindedness of the primal race, a chance circumstance operating through coincidence miraculously in our favor, which made the carvings so awesomely informative to us, and which caused us to place their photography and transcription above all other considerances. In certain rooms, the dominant arrangement was varied by the presence of maps, astronomical charts, and other scientific designs of an enlarged scale. These things giving a native and terrible corroboration to what we gathered from the pictorial friezes and diodes, and hinting what the whole world reveals. I can only hope that my account will not arouse a curiosity greater than insane caution on part of those who believe me at all. It would be tragic if any were to be allured to that realm of death and horror by the very warning meant to discourage them. Interrupting these sculptured walls were high windows and massive 12-foot doorways, both now and then and retaining petrified wooden planks, elaborately carved and polished off the actual shutters and doors. All metal fixtures had long ago vanished, but some of the doors remained in place and had to be forced aside as we progressed from room to room. Window frames with odd, transparent panes, mostly elliptical, survived here and there, though in no considerable quantity. There were also frequent niches of great magnitude, generally empty, but once in a while containing some bizarre object carved from green soapstone, which was either broken or perhaps held too inferior to warrant removal. Other apertures were undoubtedly connected with bygone mechanical facilities, heating, lighting, and the like of a sort suggested in many of the carvings. Ceilings tended to be plain, but sometimes had been inlaid with green soapstones or other tiles, mostly fallen now. Floors were also paved with such tiles, though plain stonework predominated. My god. As I have said, all furniture and other movables were absent, but the sculptures gave a clear idea of the strange devices which had once filled these tomb-like echoing rooms. Above that glacial sheets, the floors were generally thick with detritus, litter, and debris. But farther down, this condition decreased. In some of the lower chambers and corridors, there was little more than gritty dust or ancient incrustations, while occasional areas had an uncanny air of newly swept immaculateness. Of course, where rifts or collapses had occurred, the lower levels were as littered as the upper ones. A central court, as in other structures we had seen from the air, saved the inner regions from total darkness, so that we seldom had to use our electric torches in the upper rooms except when studying the sculptured details. Below the ice cap, however, the twilight deepened, and in many parts of the tangled ground level there was an approach to absolute blackness. To form even a rudimentary idea of our thoughts and feelings as we penetrated this aeon-silent maze of unhuman masonry, one must correlate a hopelessly bewildering chaos of fugitive moods, memories, and impressions. The sheer appalling antiquity and lethal desolation of the place were enough to overwhelm almost any sensitive person, but added to these elements were recent unexplained horror at the camp. Or the recent unexplained horror at the camp, and the revelations all too soon affected by the terrible mural sculptures around us. The moment we came upon a perfect section of carving, there was no ambiguity of interpretation that could exist. It took us only a brief study to give us the hideous truth, a truth which it would be naive to claim Danforth and I had not independently suspected before. Though we had carefully refrained from even hinting it to each other, there could now be no further merciful doubt about the nature of the beings which had built and inhabited this monstrous dead city. Millions of years ago, when man's ancestors were primitive, archaic mammals, and vast dinosaurs roamed the tropical steppes of Europe and Asia. We had previously clung to a desperate alternative, and instead, each to himself, the omnipresent... I completely bumbled that part. I bumbled the fumble. I fumbled the bumble. I also need to reset face tracking. Boop. Okay, back to reading. We had previously clung to a desperate alternative and insisted, each to himself, that the omnipresence of the five-pointed motifs meant only some cultural or religious exaltation of the Achaean natural object which had so patently embodied the quality of five-pointedness. As the decoration motifs of Minoan Crete exalted the sacred bull, those of Egypt the scarabus, those of Rome the wolf and eagle, and those of various savage tribes chose some totem animal. Yikes. But this lone refuge now stripped from us, we were forced to face definitely the reason-shaking realization which the reader of these pages had doubtless long ago anticipated. I can scarcely bear to write it down in black and white even now, but perhaps that will not be necessary. Oh, 1 second, the webpage is broken. Okay. Yep. I can't scroll anymore, the webpage is broken. I'll just open this on a... What the heck? Okay. January... Okay, why aren't... I'll open the book on a different webpage then, and... No, I can't. I can't. Oh god. It's not letting me move. Here, what? I'm going to switch to JPEG mode, so I can continue reading. I am sorry, viewers, for the interruption. JPEG mode. Woo. Oh, there we go. Suddenly it works. Yep, that's how JPEG mode works. I'll open the... Where were we? Like 20-something. Here we are. Okay. Sorry for the interruption, folks. I'll continue. We had previously clung to a desperate alternative... Wait, I read that. I already read that bit. It's the next bit. The things once rearing and dwelling in this frightful masonry in the age of dinosaurs were not indeed dinosaurs, but far worse. Mere dinosaurs were new and almost brainless objects, but the builders of the city were wise and old, and had left certain traces in the rocks, even then laid down well nigh 1,000 million years. Rocks laid down before the true life of Earth had advanced beyond plastic groups of cells. Rocks laid down before the true life of the Earth had existed at all. They were the makers and enslavers of that life, and above all doubt the origins of the finished elder myths, which things like the Pneumonic manuscript and the Necronomicon frighteningly hint about. They were the great old ones that had filtered down from the stars when the Earth was young, beings whose substance on an alien evolution had shaped, and whose powers were such as this planet had never bred. And to think that only the day before, Danforth and I had actually looked upon fragments of their millennially fossilized substance, and that poor Lake and his party had seen their complete outlines. It is, of course, impossible for me to relate in proper order the stages by which we picked up what we know of that monstrous chapter of pre-human life. After the first shock of the certain revelation, we had to pause a while to recuperate, and it was fully 3 o'clock before we got started on our actual tour of systematic research. The sculptures in the building we entered were of relatively late date, perhaps 2 million years ago, as checked up by geological, biological, and astronomical features, and embodied an art which would be called decadent in comparison with that of specimens we found in older buildings, after crossing bridges under the glacial sheet. One edifice hewn from the solid rock seemed to go back 40 or possibly 50 million years, to the lower Eocene or Upper Cretaceous, and contained bas-reliefs of an artistry surpassing anything else, with one tremendous exception that we encountered. That was, we have since agreed, the oldest domestic structure we traversed. Were it not for the support of those flashlights soon to be made public, I would refrain from telling what I had found and inferred, lest I be confined as a madman. Of course, the infinitely early parts of a patchwork tale, representing the pre-terrestrial life of the star-headed beings on other planets, in other galaxies, and in other universes, can readily be interpreted as the fantastic mythology of those beings themselves. Yet such parts sometimes involve designs and diagrams so uncannily close to the latest findings of mathematics and astrophysics that I scarcely know what to think. Let others judge when they see the photographs I shall publish. Water. Naturally, no one set of carvings which we encountered told more than a fraction of any connected story, nor did we even begin to come upon the various stages of that story in their proper order. Some of the vast rooms were independent units so far as their designs were concerned, while in other cases, a continuous chronicle would be carried through a series of rooms and corridors. The best of the maps and diagrams were on the walls of the frightful abyss below, even the ancient ground level. A cavern perhaps 200 square and 60 feet high, which had almost undoubtedly been an educational center of some sort. There were many provoking repetitions of the same material in different rooms and buildings, since the certain chapters of experience and certain summaries or phases of racial history had evidently been favorites with which different decorators or dwellers sometime... Oh, that's another one I bungled. I'm gonna reread that sentence. I am sorry, chat. There were many provoking repetitions of the same material in different rooms and buildings, since certain chapters of evidence and certain summaries or phases of racial history had evidently been favorites with different decorators or dwellers. Sometimes, though, variant versions of the same theme proved useful in settling debatable points and filling up gaps. I still wonder that we have deduced so much in the short time at our disposal. Of course, we even now have only the barest outline, and much of that was obtained later on from a study of the photographs and sketches we made. It may be the effect of this later study, the revived memories and vague impressions acting in conjunction with his general sensitiveness and with that final supposed horror glimpse whose essence he will not reveal even to me, which has been the immediate source of Danforth's present breakdown. But it had to be, for we could not issue our warning intelligently without the fullest possible information, and the insurance of that warning as a prime necessity. Certain lingering influences in that unknown Antarctic world of disordered time and alien natural law make it imperative that further exploration be discouraged. Okay, chat, that's the end of chapter 6. I'm going to give you another minute to say anything you want, and then I'll continue. You like cabbages? Cabbages are cool. Make some cabbage, put on a sandwich. Good sandwich. Cabbage. Cabbage sandwich. Okay, the kilobits per second seems to have returned to normal. I'm going to open up 310A again, to start the model again. I think I like lettuce more than cabbage, but cabbage is still good. I've only ever tried one Brussels sprout, but it was and I feel like I would like it if it was smaller, like a pea-sized Brussels sprout. They sell pea-sized Brussels sprouts. Tiny Brussels sprouts. Okay, just one moment here. And I do trust that you guys are totally actually watching the stream and not just having it on in another tab to up viewer numbers. You would never do that. Oh, okay. Okay, I've started up the program. Boop, there I am. Now, back to book. Chapter 7. The full story, so far as deciphered, will will eventually appear in an official bulletin of Miskatonic University. Hence, here I shall sketch only the slightest highlights in a formless, rambling way, myth or otherwise, that the sculptures told of the coming of those star-headed things to the nascent, lifeless Earth out of cosmic space. Their coming, and the coming of many other alien entities, such as at certain times embark upon spiritual pioneering. They seemed able to they seemed able to traverse the interstellar ether on the vast, membranous wings, thus confirming some curious hill folklore long ago told me by an antiquarian colleague. They had lived under the sea a good deal, building fantastic cities and fighting terrific battles with nameless adversaries by means of intricate devices employing unknown principles of energy. Eventually, their scientific and mechanical knowledge far surpassed man's today, though they made use of its more widespread and elaborate forms only when obliged to. Some sculptures suggested that they had passed through a stage of mechanized life on other planets, but had receded upon finding its effects emotionally unsatisfying. Their preternatural toughness of organization and simplicity of natural wants made them particularly able to live on a high plane without more or specialized fruits of artificial manufacture, and even without garments except for occasional protection against the elements. It was under the sea, at first for food and later for other purposes, that they first created Earth life, using available substances according to long-known methods. The more elaborate experiments came after the annihilation of various cosmic enemies. They had done the same thing on other planets, having manufactured not only necessary foods, but certain multicellular protoplasmic masses capable of molding their tissue into all sorts of temporary organs under hypnotic influence, and thereby forming ideal slaves to perform the heavy work of the community. Where was I? I was at heavy work. These viscous masses are without doubt what Abdul Alvarez whispered about as the Shoggoths in his frightful Necronomicon, though even that mad Arab had not hinted that any existed on Earth except in the dreams of those who had chewed a certain alkaloidal herb. When the star-headed old ones on this planet had synthesized their simple food forms and bred a good supply of Shoggoths, they allowed other cell groups to develop into other forms of animal and vegetable life for sundry purposes, extirpating any whose presence became troublesome. With the aid of the Shoggoths, whose expansions could be made to lift prodigious weights, the small, low cities under the sea grew to vast and imposing labyrinths of stone, not unlike those which later rose on land. Indeed, the highly capable old ones had lived much on land as in other parts of the universe, and probably retained many traditions of land construction. As we studied the architecture of all these sculpted Paleogean cities, including that whose aeon-dead corridors we were even then traversing, we were impressed by a curious coincidence which we have not yet tried to explain, even to ourselves. The coincidence that I'm going to take water right now. The tops of the buildings, which in the actual city around us had, of course, been weathered into shapeless ruins long ago, were clearly displayed in the vast reliefs and showed vast clusters of neat-like spires, delicate finals on certain cone and pyramid apexes, and tiers of thin, horizontal scalloped discs capping cylindrical shafts. This was exactly what we had seen in that monstrous and portentous mirage cast by a dead city. Once such skyline features had been absent for thousands and tens of thousands of years, which loomed on our ignorant eyes across the unfathomed mountains of madness as we first approached poor Lake's ill-fated camps. There, he said again, mountains of madness. Of the life of the old ones, both under the sea and after part of them migrated to land, volumes could be written. Those in shallow water had continued to the fullest extent, and the use of eyes at the end of their 5 main head tentacles, and had practice in the arts of sculpture and of writing in quite the usual way. The writing accomplished with a stylus on waterproof waxen surfaces, those lower down in the ocean depths, though they used a curious phosphorescent organism to furnish light. Oh, it's a spam chat. And can I like remove it? We are. I think that worked. Okay, that should fix it. Though I can't close that tab, which I want to do. Okay, where was I? I was at... Let's see. Okay. Those lower down in the ocean depths, though they descended... though they used a curious phosphorescent organism to furnish light, pierced out their vision with obscure special senses, operating through prismatic cilia on their heads, senses which rendered all the old ones partly independent of the light in emergencies. Their forms of sculpture and writing had changed, curiously, during the descent, embodying certain, apparently chemical coding processes, probably to secure photofluorescence, which the bas reliefs could not make clear to us. The beings moved in the sea partly by swimming, using the lateral crinoid arms, and partly by wriggling with the lower tier of tentacles containing the pseudofeet. Occasionally, they accomplished long swoops with auxiliary use of 2 or more sets of their fan-like folding wings. On land, they locally used the pseudofeet, but now and then flew to great heights over long distances with their wings. The many slender tentacles into which the crinoid arms branched were indefinitely delicate, flexible, strong, and accurate in muscular nervous coordination, ensuring the utmost skill and dexterity in all artistic and other manual operations. The toughness of the things was almost incredible. Even the terrific pressure of the deepest sea bottoms appeared powerless to harm them. Very few seemed to die at all except by violence, and their burial places were very limited. The fact that they covered their vertically inhumed dead with 5-pointed inscribed mounds set up thoughts in Danforth and me which made a fresh pause and recuperation necessary after the sculptures revealed it. The beings multiplied by means of spores, like vegetable radiotypes, as Lake had suspected. But, owing to their prodigious toughness and longevity and consequent lack of replacement needs, they did not encourage large-scale development of new Prothalia except when they had new regions to colonize. The young matured swiftly and received an education evidently beyond any standard we can imagine. The prevailing intellectual and aesthetic life was highly evolved and produced a tenaciously enduring set of customs and institutions, which I shall describe more fully in my coming monograph. These varied slightly according to land or sea residence, but had the same foundations and essentials. Now, the toughness of the things was almost incredible. Even the terrific pressure of the deepest sea bottoms appeared powerless to harm them. Very few seemed to No, I already read this. Though able, like vegetables, to derive nourishment from inorganic substances, they vastly preferred organic and especially animal food. They ate uncooked marine life under the sea, but cooked their veins on land. They hunted game and raised meat herds, slaughtering with a sharp weapon whose odd marks on fossil bones our expedition had noted. They resisted all ordinary temperatures marvelously, and in their natural state could live in water down to freezing. When the great chill of the Pleistocene drew on, however, nearly 1,000,000 years ago, the land dwellers had to resort to special measures, including artificial heating, until at last the deadly cold appears to have driven them back into the sea. For their prehistoric flights through cosmic space, legend said, they absorbed certain chemicals and became almost independent of eating, breathing, or heat conditions. But by the time of the Great Cold, they had lost track of the method. In any case, it could not have prolonged the artificial state indefinitely without harm. Okay. Fine, non-pairing, and semi-vegetable in structure, the old ones had no biological basis for the family phase of mammal life, but seemed to organize large households on the principles of comfortable space utility and, as we deduced from the pictured occupations and diversions of co-dwellers, congenial mental association. In furnishing their homes, they kept everything in the center of the huge rooms, leaving the wall spaces free for decorative treatment. Lighting, in the case of land inhabitants, was accomplished by a device probably electrochemical in nature. Both on land and underwater, they used curious tables, chairs, and couches like cylindrical frames, for they rested and slept upright with folded down tentacles, and racks for hinged sets of dotted surfaces forming their books. Government was evidently complex and probably socialistic, though no certainties in this way. Socialistic government based old ones? Am I seeing based old ones? It's cool. Government was evidently complex and probably socialistic, though no certainties in this regard could be deduced from the sculptures we saw. There was extensive commerce, both local and between different cities. Certain small, flat counters, 5-pointed and inscribed, serving as money. Probably the smaller of the various greenish soapstones found by our expeditions were pieces of such currency. Though the culture was mainly urban, some agriculture and much stock processing existed. Mining and a limited amount of manufacturing were also practiced. Travel was very frequent, but permanent migration seemed relatively rare except for the vast colonizing movements by which the race expanded. For personal locomotion, no external aid was used, since in land, air, and water movement alike, the Old Ones seemed to possess excessively vast capacities for speed. Loads, however, were drawn by beasts of burden, shoggoths under the sea, and a curious variety of primitive vertebrates in the later years of land existence. These vertebrates, as well as an infinity of other life forms, animal and vegetable, marine, terrestrial, and aerial, were the products of unguided evolution acting on life cells made by the Old Ones, but escaping beyond their radius of attention. They had been suffered to develop unchecked because they had not come in conflict with dominant beings. Bothersome forms, of course, were mechanically exterminated. It interests us to see in some of the very last and most decadent sculptures a shambling primitive mammal, used sometimes for food and sometimes as an amusing buffoon by the land dwellers, whose vaguely simian and human foreshadowings were unmistakable. In buildings of land cities, the huge stone blocks of the high towers were generally lifted by vast winged pterodactyls, a species hitherto unknown to paleontology. More water. Okay. Their persistence with which the Old Ones survived various geologic changes and convulsions of the Earth quests was little short of miraculous. Though few or none of their first cities seem to have remained beyond the Archean Age, there was no interruption in their civilization or in the transmission of their records. The original place of advent to the planet was the Antarctic Ocean, and it is likely that they came not long after the matter, forming the moon. The original place of advent to the planet was the Antarctic Ocean, and it is likely that they came not long after. The matter forming the moon was wrenched from the neighboring South Pacific. According to one of the sculpted maps, the whole globe was then underwater, with stone cities scattered farther and farther from the Antarctic as eons passed. Another map shows a vast bulk of dry land around the South Pole, where it is evidence that some of the beings made experimental settlements, though their main centers were transferred to the nearest sea bottom. Later maps, which display a land mass as cracking as drifting, and sending certain detached parts northward, upholding in a striking way the theories of continental drift lately advanced by Taylor, Wegner, and Jolly. Oh cool, he's a believer in continental drift, Lovecraft. That's good. With the upheaval of new land in the South Pacific, tremendous events began. Some of the marine cities were hopelessly shattered, yet that was not the worst misfortune. Another race, a land race of beings shaped like octopi and probably corresponding to the fabulous pre-human spawn of Cthulhu, soon began filtering down from cosmic infinity and precipitated a monstrous war for which a time drove the Old Ones wholly back to sea. Okay. A colossal blow in view of the increasing land settlements. Later, peace was made, and the new lands were given to the Cthulhu spawn, whilst the old ones held the sea and the older lands. New land cities were founded, the greatest of them in the Antarctic, for For this region of first arrival was sacred. From then on, as before, the Antarctic remained the center of the Old One's civilization, and all the cities built there by Cthulhu's spawn were blotted out. Then, suddenly, the lands of the Pacific sank again, taking with them the frightful stone city of Rayleigh and all the cosmic octopi, so that the Old Ones were again supreme on the planet except for one shadowy fear, for about they did not like to speak. At a rather later age, their cities dotted all the land and water areas of the globe, hence the recommendation in my coming monograph that some archaeologists make systematic borings with pad bodies type of apparatus in certain widely separated regions. The steady trend down the ages from water to land, a moment encouraged by the rise of the new land masses, though the ocean was never wholly deserted. Another cause of the landward movement was the new difficulty in breeding and managing the shoggoths, upon which successful sea life depended. With the march of time, as the old sculptures sadly confessed, the art of creating new life from inorganic matter had been lost, so that the old ones had to depend on the molding of forms already in existence. On land, the great reptiles proved highly tractable, but the shoggoths of the sea, reproduction by fission and acquiring a dangerous degree of accidental intelligence, presented for a time a formidable problem. They had always been controlled through the hypnotic suggestions of the Old One, and had modeled their tough plasticity into various temporary limbs and organs, but now their self-molding powers sometimes exercised independently, and in various imitative forms implanted by past suggestion. They had, it seems, developed a semi-stable brain whose separate and occasionally sovereign volition echoed the will of the Old Ones without always obeying it. Sculpture's image of the shoggoths filled Danforth and me with horror and loathing. They were normally shapeless entities composed of a viscous jelly which looks like an angulation of bubbles, and each averaged about 15 feet in diameter when a sphere. They had, however, a constant shifting shape and volume, throwing out temporary developments or forming apparitions, apparent organs of sight, hearing, and speech in imitation of their masters, either spontaneously or according to suggestion. They seem to have become peculiarly intractable towards the middle of the Permian Age, perhaps 150 million years ago, when a veritable war of resubjugation was waged upon them by the Old Ones. Pictures of this war and of the headless, slime-coated fashion in which the shoggoths typically left their slain victims held a marvelously fearsome quality despite atomic disturbances against the rebel entities. And in the the Old Ones used curious weapons of molecular and atomic disturbances against the rebel entities, and in the end had achieved a complete victory. Thereafter, sculptures showed a period in which shoggoths were tamed and broken by armed Old Ones, as the wild horses of American West were tamed by cowboys. Though during the rebellion the shoggoths had shown an ability to live out of water, this transition was not encouraged, since their usefulness on land would hardly have been commensurate with the trouble of their management. During the Jurassic Age, the Old Ones met fresh adversity in the form of new invasion from outer space, this time by half-fungus, half-crustacean creatures undoubtedly the same as those figuring in certain whispers, hill legends of the north, and remembered as the Himalayas as the Moigo, or abominable snowmen. To fight these beings, the Old Ones attempted, for the first time, time since their terrene advent to sally forth again into planetary ether, but despite all traditional preparations, found it no longer possible to leave the Earth's atmosphere. Whatever the old secret of interstellar travel had been, it was now definitely lost to the race. In the end, the Moiguo drove the old ones out of all the northern lands. Though they were powerless to disturb those in the sea, little by little, the slow retreat of the elder race to their original Antarctic habitat was beginning. Let me check. It was curious to know from the pictured battles that both the Cthulhu spawn and the Moiguo seem to have been composed of matter more wildly different from that which we know was the substance of the old ones. They were able to undergo transformations and reintegrations impossible for their adversaries, and seem therefore to have originally come from even remoter gulfs of cosmic space. The old ones, but for their abnormal toughness and peculiar or vital properties, were strictly material, and must have had their absolute origin with the known space-time continuum. Whereas the first sources of the other beings can only be guessed at with blasted breath. All of this, of course, assuming that the non-terrestrial linkages and the anomalies ascribed to the invading foes are not pure mythology. Conceivably, the old ones might have invented a cosmic framework to account for their occasional defeats, since historical interest and pride obviously formed their chief physiological element. It is significant that their annals fail to mention many advanced and potent races of beings whose mighty cultures and towering cities figure presently in certain obscure legends. Sorry, water. Oh, we have another viewer. That's nice. Welcome. The changing state of the world that through long geologic ages appeared with startling vividness in many of the sculpted maps and senses. In certain cases, existing science will require revision, while in other cases, its bold deductions are magnificently confirmed. As I have said, the hypothesis of Taylor, Wegener, and Jolly that all of the continents are fragments of an original Antarctic landmass, which cracked from centrifugal force and drifted apart over a technically viscous lower surface, an hypothesis suggested by such things as the complementary outlines of Africa and South America, and the way the great mountain chains are rolled and shoved up, receives striking support from this uncanny source. Maps evidently showing the Carboniferous world of 100 million years ago. Maps evidently showing the Carboniferous world of 100 million years or more ago displayed significant rifts and chasms destined to later separate Africa from the once continuous realms of Europe, then the Volusia of primal legend, Asia, the Americas, and the Antarctic continent. Other charts, and most significantly the one in connection with the founding 50 million years ago, the vast dead city around us, showed all the present continents well differentiated, and in the latest discoverable specimen, dating from late Pliocene age, the approximate world of today appeared quite clearly despite the linkage of Alaska with Siberia, of North America with Europe through Greenland, and of South America with the Antarctic continent through Greenland. In the old Carboniferous map, the whole globe ocean floor and rifted landmass alike bore symbols of the old ones, vast stone cities, but in later specimen... the final Pliocene specimen showed no land cities except on the Antarctic continent and the tip of South America, nor any ocean cities north of the 50th parallel south latitude. Knowledge and interest in the northern world, save for study of coastlines, probably made during long exploration flights on those fan-like membranous wings, had evidently declined to 0 among the old ones. Destruction of cities through the upthrust of mountains, the centrifugal rendering of continents, the seismic convulsions of land or sea bottom, and other natural causes was a matter of common record, and it was curious to observe how fewer and fewer replacements were made as the ages wore on. The vast dead megalopolis that yawned around us seemed to be the last general center of the race, built early in the Cretaceous age, after a titanic earth buckling had obliterated a still vaster predecessor not far distant. It appeared that this general region was the most sacred spot of all, where reputedly the first old ones settled on a primal sea bottom. In the new city, many of whose features we could recognize in the sculptures, but which stretched fully 100 miles along the mountain range in each direction, beyond the farthest limits of our aerial survey, there were reputed to be certain sacred stones forming part of the first sea-bottom city, which thrust up to light after long epochs in the course of the general crumbling of strata. Okay, that's the end of chapter 7. Hi chat. I think we're going to do a brief, I don't know, something break here because my voice is killing me. It's just my throat wants death. Also, is anyone actually here? Because if no one's here, I'll just like stop if no one's interested. Which would be a shame, but is anyone here? Hello? Hello? You can just, like, type something in chat. Oh, one of you doesn't have a Discord account. I mean, sorry, Twitch account. I guess you couldn't do that. But I'd assume most people have a Twitch account. Okay. Well, that's a bummer. Guess. I guess I'll end it here, then, if no one's watching. Wait, let me check something first. I'm just gonna check. Maybe there's another Team Saho member who's live, and we're splitting the viewer base. I guess I'm not splitting because no one's here. Yeah, no one's live, I guess. Huh. Oh. Well then, I guess we'll end that here, and I'll have to find something else to put in the midday slot, because this obviously doesn't interest anyone. We're watching this as a VOD, it's like years later, and anyone actually watches the VODs, and you want this to continue, I guess you can contact me about it in later chats, but from now on, until further notice, the Lovecraft streams are Cancelled. Goodbye.